Good morning, friends. I'm putting this video together to clarify what I did in our last study. I think looking back and reading it carefully, I put too much material into one message. I tried to explain the difference between Daniel and Revelation. I don't know how well I did, but I think the confusion came when I tried to explain the 70 weeks. So I'd like to do something today and try to clarify that a little bit and go over that and make it simpler to understand. You recall when Daniel was praying, he was concerned about the 70 weeks being almost completed, and he wondered about what was going to happen next. I don't think he thought God had forgotten him, but he didn't have any answers himself. So he did the right thing. He went and prayed and talked to God about it, and God answered his prayer. And through the angel Gabriel, he was assured that the prayer was heard and answered, and now he's explaining to him what is next on the agenda. And God tells him that 70 weeks are determined upon the nation of Israel. This is the next thing that Daniel needed to know. Now, Daniel did not have all the details. He didn't know how these were going to take place or when. He knew that God promised that this was going to happen, and it was good news to Daniel because he wanted good news for his people. So God gave him the message concerning what's going to happen in these 70 weeks. Now let's turn to the scripture and Daniel 9, verse 24. And here's what God says: 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the prophecies of the vision, and finally to anoint the most holy. So that is the purpose for the 70 weeks, to accomplish these matters mentioned in Daniel 9, verse 24. So if you need reference to that, that's where that's found. So let me try to make it simple and divide it up. We mentioned that these 70 weeks were 7 periods of 70. Now, in the case of Daniel, there were 77 periods of 70 years, and they were divided up into 70 weeks. Each 70 years being 1 week. Or I'm starting to muddy it up already. There were 7 periods of 70 years. But the first 49 years consisted of what we call the first week. A week is 7 days. Well, this is a period of 49 years, 7 times 7, 7 times 7 years. So the first week mentioned, it says from the time of the decree given to go forth and the completion of the temple was the completion of the first of those 70 weeks, and it took a period of 49 years. So that's kind of simple way of looking at it. Now there are 62 more weeks on the agenda after the building of the temple. And it is during these 62 weeks, Messiah is going to come, and he's going to accomplish these things mentioned in verse 24. And at the end of 62 weeks, or the 69th week, Messiah would be cut off. So you see the period from the building of the temple and the coming of Jesus, the dying of Jesus on the cross, fulfilled 62 of those 70 weeks. So far now, we have 69 weeks completed. And that's mentioned in Daniel. He doesn't mention Jesus. He doesn't mention Jesus fulfilling all of these. We know that because it's already done. But from Daniel's perspective, it was still future. Now we come to the final week. And here's where I must take some time to clarify. It said regarding that 70 week that a prince should come and he would cause destruction to take place, and the flood and an overflowing. And the question arises, who is this prince? It's not Jesus. So we can eliminate that. But the prince would come after Jesus was cut off. This prince would arrive and cause many desolations. And there was a prince historically that did arrive. It was a man by the name of Titus. Incidentally, in our last study, I mentioned a man who followed Titus, and I called him Dionysius. I was wrong. His name is Diocletian. History records that. Dionysius also was the man who lived during that time, and I was confusing him with Diocletian. He was a righteous man. Good things were said about Dionysius. But Diocletian was the one that banished John to the island of Patmos. So we see a historical fulfillment taking place of a destruction happening after the death of Jesus. And the 70 weeks seems to clarify that. But the question arises, and we must keep the 70 weeks in harmony with the rest of what else Daniel said. See, Daniel did not know, but God did. And he talked about a prince that should come. And God also talked about a prince that would come that would cause desolation and destruction in the land of Israel. And he will be taken out by the Ancient of Days. The arrival of, remember the rock cut out of the mountain? Well, he will be the same person, and he will destroy this little horn that will arise during this time. And the prince that Daniel is spoken of is not Titus completely. God has in mind another prince, and that would be in harmony with the little horn that we mentioned in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 10. And the little horn is yet future. It's not going to take place immediately after Christ's death. Now, I need to explain something, because in a sense, who is right? Are the historians right to say it was fulfilled in AD 70? Or are the others right? Well, I say there is a sense in which they both are right. If you look at this prince being fulfilled in a historical sense, then AD 70 would make sense as fulfilling that time. But God is not speaking of a historical time. He's talking of a prophetical time, and he's speaking to Daniel. And the prince that God has in mind is prophetical in nature and not historical. Now, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying God is contradiction. What I'm saying is there are two ways of looking at this 70th week. One is historically, and the one is prophetically. Historically, we can say it was fulfilled and not be wrong. But there is yet a prophetic fulfillment to take place. And Jesus tells us about that in his Olivet Discourse. He's speaking of the signs that would take place prior to his arrival. And he said something interesting. And he wasn't referring to Titus destroying Jerusalem. He was talking about the events just prior to his arrival, the great tragedies that would take place, and the falling away and the rising of the man of sin. And Jesus says, in describing these events that would take place prior to his return, he says, remember the prophecies of Daniel when he spoke about the destruction, the death, the devastation that would take place, and that referred to the events mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. And they were prophetical in nature and not historical. So we must see that when Jesus said this, he was referring to a future time, and it regarded to Antichrist, who would come and his reign would take place just prior to the coming of Christ. So in describing the 70th week, we can understand them if we see them as two perspectives, both being true. But the prophetical one is the one that God was giving to Daniel. Daniel did not understand the historical elements of these matters. And looking at them in the manner that God gave them to Daniel, they were given as things future that go beyond the death of Jesus Christ. They refer to a period of time prior to his second coming, not his first one. Well, I think that's about as simple as I could make it. I talked to you about why the confusion exists, and there doesn't have to be confusion. God told Daniel that 70 weeks are going to arrive, and he spoke to Daniel in a prophetical sense. And that's all we need to know for now. God didn't give Daniel the details, but it's interesting. At the end of the book of Daniel, we're told God told Daniel to seal up the vision, to put a covering over it, so to speak. It's finished. That's all he's going to give Daniel. But when we come to the book of Revelation, he tells John to open it up. God's purpose now is not to uncover, but to remove the blanket, to remove the covering, and make clear what Daniel failed to understand and make clear. So revelation is given to clarify the mysteries that Daniel brings to our minds, as we did not find them fulfilled during his time. So I guess that's all I need to say, and I hope I made it clear. I don't know how to do it any better, and I hope you won't be confused. I hope that this helped to solve things a little bit. Well, we'll see you next time as we begin our study in Revelation.